Olivia had everything a woman could ever wish for: wealth, beauty, and a husband who adored her. She lived in a mansion so grand that it could have been a palace, with marble floors that gleamed under golden chandeliers, walls adorned with priceless paintings, and windows so tall that they let in endless light. Outside, the estate stretched far and wide, with neatly trimmed gardens, sparkling fountains, and a swimming pool as blue as the sky. Yet despite all this, Olivia felt empty. She had married Richard knowing what kind of life she was stepping into. He was a powerful businessman, a man who had built an empire with his own hands. He was respected, admired, even feared by some. But what he wasn't was present. Richard traveled constantly. One day he would be in one part of the world. The next he was somewhere else entirely. His life was a series of meetings, business deals, and private jets. Whenever he was home, he was kind and generous to Olivia, showering her with gifts, expensive jewelry, designer clothes, and vacations in exotic locations. But Olivia didn't want things. She wanted him. She wanted company, affection, warmth, something that all the wealth in the world couldn't buy. She had tried to fill the emptiness in different ways. She attended charity galas, threw lavish parties, and spent hours shopping in high-end boutiques. She made friends with other wealthy women, but their conversations were shallow. Endless gossip about whose husband was cheating, who had the newest car, and who had gained weight. It was all meaningless. At the end of the day, Olivia would return to the massive estate, to a bed that felt too big and too cold. She had servants, yes. They moved silently around the house, fulfilling her every need. But they were not companions. They were not friends. She was alone in a world full of people. But then Caleb arrived. Caleb was Richard's son from his first marriage, a young man of 19 who had just finished high school. Olivia had met him a few times over the years, but he had always been distant, polite but reserved. His mother had passed away when he was little, and though Olivia had always tried to be warm and welcoming, Caleb had never fully let her in. He had been living with Richard's brother, but now that he was on break before starting university, he was coming home for the holidays. The news of Caleb's arrival stirred something in Olivia. Excitement. Anticipation. Finally, someone would be in the house. Finally, she wouldn't be alone. On the day of his arrival, Olivia stood by the front entrance, watching as a sleek black car pulled into the long driveway. The driver stepped out first, moving swiftly to open the door. And then Caleb emerged. The last time Olivia had seen him, he had been just a boy. Now he was a man. He had grown taller, his shoulders broader. His once soft features had sharpened, his jawline more defined, his eyes deeper, more thoughtful. There was a quiet confidence about him, something steady and composed. "Caleb," Olivia greeted, her voice warm as she stepped forward. He turned his gaze to her, his expression calm but polite. "Olivia," he acknowledged. "It's good to see you again." "Welcome home," she said, offering a smile. For a moment she hesitated, unsure whether to hug him, but instead she reached out and took his hand in both of hers. "You've grown so much." Caleb gave a small, reserved smile. "Thank you." She led him inside, giving him a tour as if he hadn't been here before. The estate was massive, and though he had visited in the past, it had never been his home. "You'll be staying in the East Wing," Olivia told him as they walked through the endless corridors. "Your room is ready, and if you need anything, don't hesitate to ask." "I appreciate it," Caleb said, his voice calm and measured. With Caleb in the house, everything felt different. The mansion was no longer silent. There were footsteps in the hallways, the sound of a door opening and closing, the low murmur of a voice in another room. Olivia found herself listening for him, noticing his presence in a way she hadn't expected. Meals became something to look forward to. Caleb was intelligent, thoughtful. He spoke about books, about the future, about his dreams of studying engineering. Unlike the people Olivia usually interacted with, Caleb wasn't interested in money or status. He had ideas, ambition, and a quiet depth that made Olivia curious. One evening they sat in the living room, a fire crackling softly in the fireplace. Olivia curled up in her chair with a glass of wine, watching Caleb as he read a book. His focus was intense, his brow slightly furrowed. "You've always loved reading," Olivia remarked, swirling the wine in her glass. Caleb looked up, a small smile playing on his lips. "It's my escape." She tilted her head. "Escape from what?" He hesitated before answering. "From everything." Olivia understood that feeling more than she wanted to admit. At first, Olivia convinced herself that she was just happy to have company. Caleb was a breath of fresh air in a house that had felt like a tomb. She enjoyed their conversations, the way he spoke, the way he thought. But then something shifted. She started noticing things about him, things she shouldn't have been noticing. The depth in his voice, the confidence in his movements, the way his eyes held hers a second longer than necessary. It was subtle at first. A lingering glance. A moment of silence that felt heavier than it should have. A comment that could have been innocent, but wasn't. And then there was the way she felt around him. It was different. It wasn't the polite warmth of a stepmother toward her stepson. It was something else. Something dangerous. Olivia told herself it was nothing. Just admiration. Just interest. But deep down she knew she was playing with fire. Caleb's presence in the house changed everything. The once lifeless estate was now filled with quiet movement, soft footsteps, and the occasional sound of his voice. Olivia had never realized how much she craved companionship until now. At first it was simple. She would find excuses to spend time with him, small moments here and there. Breakfast together in the grand dining hall, where she would ask him about his plans for university. Afternoon walks in the garden, where she would listen as he talked about his dreams. Evenings by the fireplace where they would sit in comfortable silence, both lost in their own thoughts. Olivia noticed the change before Caleb did. It was in the way she looked at him, longer, deeper. In the way she spoke to him, softer, more intimate. In the way she lingered when their hands accidentally touched. At first she convinced herself it was harmless. She was just being friendly, just making him feel welcome. After all, Caleb was young, fresh out of high school, barely an adult. But he wasn't a child anymore. He had the quiet confidence of a man who was learning to understand the world, and himself. And Olivia was starting to see him differently. One afternoon they sat in the garden, the sun casting golden light over them. Olivia was wearing a summer dress, the fabric soft and flowing. She watched as Caleb leaned back on the bench, his fingers lazily flipping through the pages of a book. "You've changed a lot since I last saw you," she said, her voice light. Caleb glanced up, raising an eyebrow. "Have I?" "You have," Olivia murmured, tilting her head slightly. "You're not the quiet boy I remember. There's something different about you now." Caleb gave a small smile. "I guess I've grown up." "You certainly have," she said, her eyes lingering on him for a moment too long. Caleb noticed. He wasn't sure what it meant, but something about the way she looked at him sent a strange feeling through his chest. The way Olivia dressed around him changed. Lighter fabrics, softer colors, dresses that clung just enough to highlight her curves. The way she moved around him became more deliberate, standing closer than necessary, brushing past him when there was plenty of space. And then there were the compliments. "You have your father's strong features," she said one evening, her eyes scanning his face. "But your eyes, they're different. Sharper. More thoughtful." Caleb shifted slightly, uncomfortable but intrigued. "I never thought much about it." "Well," Olivia smiled, "maybe you should." Caleb told himself it was nothing. That Olivia was just being kind, that he was imagining things. But as the days went by he started noticing more. The lingering eye contact. The way her voice softened when she spoke to him. The way her fingers brushed against his hand when she handed him something. He wasn't sure how to feel about it. Then came the night of the storm. It started with heavy rain, the kind that made the windows rattle and the trees sway violently. The power flickered once, then went out completely, plunging the estate into darkness. Caleb had been in his room reading, when he heard Olivia's voice in the hallway. "Caleb." He stepped out, his silhouette outlined by the dim glow of the candles she held. "I'm here." She sighed in relief. "I hate when the power goes out. It makes the house feel scary." Caleb smirked. "You live in a mansion. It always feels scary." Olivia chuckled softly. "Fair point." She stepped closer, her candle casting flickering shadows across her face. "Come downstairs. We can light a few more candles and wait out the storm together." Caleb hesitated but then nodded. Downstairs, Olivia had already set up a few candles in the living room. The warm glow made the space feel strangely intimate. She curled up on the couch, her silk robe slipping slightly off one shoulder as she tucked her legs beneath her. Caleb sat across from her, stretching his legs out, feeling the quiet tension in the air. "I used to love storms when I was younger," Olivia mused. "They always felt thrilling." Thrilling. Caleb asked, raising an eyebrow. She smiled, her eyes flickering toward him. There's something exciting about them, don't you think? The way the sky lights up, the way the thunder shakes the ground. Caleb shrugged. I guess I never thought about it that way. Olivia leaned forward slightly, resting her chin on her hand. You should try seeing things differently, Caleb. The world is full of excitement, but only if you allow yourself to feel it. There was something in her voice, something almost hypnotic. And then she reached out, her fingers lightly touching his arm. It was barely a touch. Barely anything at all. But Caleb felt it. A spark. Something unfamiliar. Something he wasn't sure he wanted to understand. He swallowed hard, his pulse quickening. I should probably head to bed, he said suddenly, standing up. Olivia tilted her head, a slow, knowing smile playing on her lips. Of course. Good night, Caleb. Caleb nodded, turning away, his mind spinning. The night of the storm changed everything. Caleb had gone to bed that night feeling unsettled. Olivia's touch had been light, almost insignificant, but it lingered in his mind like an echo. He told himself it was nothing, just a moment of warmth, just a touch in the dim candlelight. But deep down he knew something had shifted. And so did Olivia. The next morning the air in the house felt different. Caleb noticed it immediately. At breakfast Olivia was cheerful. Too cheerful. She smiled more, laughed softly at things that weren't funny, and when she poured his coffee, her fingers brushed against his once again. Did you sleep well? She asked, her voice smooth. Caleb hesitated. Yeah. Fine. Good, Olivia said, stirring her tea slowly. I was worried the storm kept you up. I slept through most of it, he lied. Olivia's lips curled into a knowing smile. I see. He was testing him. He could feel it. Watching for his reaction, pushing the boundaries just a little further. Over the next few days Olivia became bolder. She started wearing dresses that clung to her body in just the right way. She would lean in close when they spoke, her perfume lingering in the air between them. When they passed each other in the hall, she wouldn't move away quickly. She let the moment stretch, let the tension settle between them like something alive. Caleb tried to ignore it. But Olivia knew what she was doing. Caleb had always respected Olivia. She had been nothing but kind to him over the years. She wasn't his mother, no one could replace her, but she had never tried to be. She had simply been there, warm and welcoming. But now something about her felt different. It wasn't just kindness anymore. It was something else. Something heavier, something that made his heart race in ways it shouldn't. He told himself he was imagining it. He told himself Olivia was just trying to make him feel comfortable, that she was naturally warm and affectionate. But then there were moments that shattered that illusion. Like the afternoon by the pool. It was a scorching day and Caleb decided to take a swim. The cool water felt refreshing against his skin, easing some of the tension he had been carrying. He swam a few laps, then leaned against the pool's edge, letting the sun warm his face. That was when he heard footsteps. He turned his head just in time to see Olivia stepping out onto the pool deck. She was wearing a swimsuit, one that left very little to the imagination. A deep red one-piece that hugged her body perfectly, the fabric clinging to her curves like a second skin. Caleb swallowed hard. You don't mind if I join you, do you? Olivia asked, already stepping closer. Caleb hesitated. No, of course not. She smiled and slid into the water, moving gracefully. The sun reflected off her wet skin, making her glow. For a while she simply floated, her body relaxed, her head tilted back. Then she swam toward Caleb, stopping just a few inches from him. You don't talk much, she murmured, tilting her head. Caleb forced a small chuckle. I just don't have much to say. Olivia studied him, her eyes sharp and observant. Or maybe you have too much to say and you don't know how. Caleb tensed. He didn't like the way she was looking at him, like she could see something inside him he didn't even understand himself. Then before he could react, Olivia reached out. She touched his arm, just a simple touch, but it burned. Caleb stiffened. I should get out, he muttered, moving away quickly. He climbed out of the pool, grabbed his towel and walked off before Olivia could say another word. That night Caleb couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, his mind replaying every moment. The way Olivia had looked at him. The way her fingers had felt against his skin. The way his heart had pounded in his chest. He felt guilty. This was his father's wife. Richard loved Olivia. He spoke about her with admiration, with pride. How could Caleb even entertain these thoughts? But Olivia wasn't making it easy to ignore her. The next morning she acted like nothing had happened. She greeted him as she always did, smiled as if she hadn't nearly broken him the day before. And that was when Caleb realized, Olivia wasn't just playing a game. She was winning. And he was losing. A week later Olivia found her opportunity. It was late in the evening and Caleb had just finished reading in the study. He stepped out into the hallway, stretching his arms when he heard Olivia's voice. Caleb. He turned. She was standing there in a silk robe, her hair slightly damp as if she had just taken a shower. Can you help me with something? She asked, her voice soft. Caleb hesitated. He knew he should say no. He knew he should turn and walk away. But he didn't. Sure, he said. She led him into the sitting room, where a bottle of wine and 2 glasses were already waiting. I couldn't sleep, she admitted, sitting down and gesturing for him to do the same. I thought maybe a drink would help. Caleb slowly lowered himself into the chair across from her. He watched as Olivia poured the wine, her fingers moving slowly, deliberately. She handed him a glass, then raised her own. To whatever this is. Caleb frowned slightly. Whatever what is? Olivia smiled. This strange new friendship of ours. Caleb didn't respond. He simply took a sip of his wine, his heart pounding. They sat in silence for a while. Then Olivia leaned forward, resting her elbow on the table, her eyes locked onto his. You're different from most boys your age, she said. Caleb swallowed hard. What do you mean? You think more. You see more. Her lips curled slightly. You feel more. Caleb felt trapped, like a mouse caught in the gaze of a snake. He knew he should leave. He knew this was the moment where he could still turn back. But then Olivia reached out, gently brushing her fingers against his hand. And Caleb didn't pull away. He couldn't. Something inside him shattered in that moment. Because he wanted this. Even though he knew it was wrong. Even though he knew it would destroy everything. And Olivia saw it. She smiled softly, her fingers still resting on his. And just like that he had crossed the line. Caleb barely recognized himself anymore. The moment he hadn't pulled away from Olivia's touch, everything changed. He had spent weeks resisting, fighting against the invisible pull between them. But now it was as if a dam had broken. And Olivia knew it. She no longer had to play the waiting game. She no longer needed to be subtle. The stolen glances, the lingering touches, the carefully planned encounters. Now they were undeniable. Now they were something more. Every moment alone with Olivia felt dangerous. The first time it happened it was late at night. The estate was quiet and Caleb had been walking past the sitting room when he saw her. She was waiting for him. Come sit with me, she had whispered. And he had. They didn't speak much that night. There were no confessions, no dramatic declarations. Just a slow descent into something they both knew they couldn't stop. A brush of fingers, a whisper of breath, a soft, forbidden kiss in the dim candlelight. It should have been the last time. But it wasn't. The days blurred into one another, each moment laced with stolen intimacy. Olivia had perfected the art of seduction and Caleb, young, inexperienced and utterly caught in her web, was powerless against it. Guilt clawed at him but he couldn't fight the way Olivia made him feel. He had never been desired before, never been looked at the way she looked at him. She made him feel like a man. And that was what scared him the most. Richard called often, checking in on them. Each time Caleb felt his stomach twist into knots. His father trusted Olivia completely. He trusted Caleb completely. And every time Richard's voice came through the speakerphone, filled with warmth and pride, Caleb wanted to tell him everything. But Olivia would always smile at him across the room, a silent warning in her eyes. So he stayed silent. One evening as Caleb was sitting in his room, his phone buzzed with a message from his father. Richard, I miss you, son. How's everything? Olivia taking good care of you? Caleb stared at the words for a long time, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. He thought about telling the truth. But instead he typed. Caleb, yeah, everything's fine. Olivia's been great. It was the easiest lie he had ever told. And the hardest one to live with. As much as Caleb tried to pretend he was in control, he wasn't. The more time he spent with Olivia, the more reckless she became. She would reach for his hand when the house staff was nearby, smile at him in ways that made his heart race when she knew someone could walk in at any moment. He was playing with fire. And Caleb was burning. One evening as they sat in the library, Olivia leaned close to him, her breath warm against his skin. "You're thinking too much," she murmured. Caleb tensed. "I should be thinking. This is wrong." Olivia smirked. "Then stop thinking." She pressed a soft kiss against his neck, and for a moment he let himself forget everything. But deep down he knew the truth. Secrets don't stay buried forever. And theirs was about to be uncovered. It happened so fast. Richard had been scheduled to return in a week, but business had wrapped up early. Caleb was in the kitchen when he heard the front door open, followed by the sound of luggage being set down. Then came the voice that made his stomach drop. "Olivia?" "Caleb?" "I'm home." Caleb froze. The room spun. He wasn't ready. Olivia appeared in the doorway, calm as ever. She placed a hand on Caleb's shoulder and squeezed lightly, a silent command. "Stay calm," she whispered. Then she walked out to greet her husband. Caleb followed a few seconds later, his heart pounding. Richard smiled when he saw him. "There's my boy." He pulled Caleb into a firm hug, and the guilt hit Caleb like a tidal wave. Because standing just a few feet away, Olivia was smiling. And no one knew the truth but them. Richard's return had shifted the dynamics of the household completely. When Caleb first heard the sound of Richard's voice calling out as he entered the house, everything inside him froze. His pulse raced, his stomach twisted with guilt and dread. He had spent the past weeks in the delicate web of lies that Olivia had spun around him, and now, standing on the precipice of discovery, he felt the weight of every secret they had kept. The house, once so silent and empty in Richard's absence, now felt alive with the noise of their reality. Caleb's heartbeat thudded in his chest, and it seemed as though every sound around him was amplified. The creaking of the floorboards, the soft ticking of the grandfather clock, even the whisper of Olivia's breath as she walked beside him, her presence a constant reminder of the forbidden thing they had done. "Caleb, my boy, you look good." Richard's voice rang through the house as he appeared in the hallway. Richard was smiling, looking every bit the confident businessman who had built his empire from the ground up. His eyes twinkled with pride as he pulled Caleb into a hug, but Caleb couldn't bear the touch. He had once admired his father, seeing him as a role model, a pillar of strength and stability. Now, in the wake of what had happened between him and Olivia, he felt like a stranger to his own family. "Thanks, Dad," Caleb murmured, managing a weak smile. Richard pulled back, his eyes soft with affection. "It's good to be home. You and Olivia have been holding down the fort, right? Keeping things running smoothly while I was gone?" "Of course," Caleb replied, his voice lacking the usual warmth. He tried not to look at Olivia, who was standing just a few feet away, her gaze fixed on Richard with a smile that, to Caleb, now seemed too practiced, too forced. Olivia had always been the perfect wife, the perfect stepmother. But now Caleb knew her for what she truly was. A manipulator, a deceiver, someone who had used him to fill the emptiness in her life. And yet, as he stood there, unable to move, he realized just how deeply he had fallen under her spell. Richard clapped Caleb on the back, a smile spreading across his face. "Let's get dinner ready. I'm starving. I'll be up in a few to change out of this suit." Caleb nodded and watched as Richard disappeared up the stairs. His mind raced, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed permanently. The illusion of their perfect family had cracked, and it seemed like nothing could hold the pieces together anymore. As soon as Richard was out of sight, Olivia stepped closer to Caleb. She smiled, but it was a smile that felt wrong now, empty and calculating. "You're doing fine," she whispered, her fingers grazing his arm in an almost too familiar way. Caleb pulled back slightly, but his eyes stayed fixed on her. There was something different in the way she looked at him now. More possessive, more desperate. He couldn't understand how she could act so normal, so unaffected by the web they had woven together. "Olivia," Caleb said, his voice barely above a whisper. "This can't keep going. We can't keep doing this." She laughed softly, almost lovingly, and reached up to touch his cheek. "You're overthinking it. Everything's fine, Caleb. Just relax. Don't worry. No one needs to know anything." But Caleb wasn't sure he could relax anymore. Every time she touched him, every time their eyes met, he could feel the weight of their secret pressing down on him. He felt trapped, caught between the love and loyalty he had for his father and the desire that had consumed him for weeks. Just as Caleb was about to speak again, Richard reappeared at the top of the stairs, dressed casually now, a grin on his face. "Dinner's ready, everyone." Let's eat. The dinner table felt colder than ever. Richard, oblivious to the tension simmering just beneath the surface, talked animatedly about his business trip, recounting the meetings he'd had and the people he'd met. Olivia smiled and nodded, playing her role flawlessly, but Caleb noticed the subtle way she would glance at him, always lingering too long. He couldn't escape her eyes even when he tried to look away. Caleb's appetite had vanished. The food on his plate seemed to mock him. He couldn't shake the guilt, the shame. Every bite felt like a betrayal. Every moment spent sitting at the table pretending everything was normal felt like he was suffocating. After dinner, Richard suggested they all go into the sitting room to relax. Olivia and Caleb followed him, though Caleb's steps felt heavy. The house was too big now, too empty. He could hear every echo of his footsteps, each one marking his descent further into the chaos that had come to define his life. They settled into the comfortable chairs in the sitting room, but Caleb couldn't relax. Every time he glanced at Olivia, his stomach twisted. He knew she was watching him, studying him. He could see it in her eyes. The hunger, the desire, the need to pull him back into her world, the one they had created so twisted and wrong. Richard, noticing Caleb's lack of enthusiasm, raised an eyebrow. "You okay, son?" Caleb quickly nodded. "Yeah. Just tired. It's been a long day." Richard smiled warmly, clearly not sensing the storm brewing inside his son. "It's been a long few weeks, I imagine. Don't worry, everything's going to be fine now that I'm back." But Caleb didn't feel fine. He felt like he was drowning in a sea of lies, each breath he took only making it harder to stay afloat. "I'm going to take a walk," Caleb said suddenly, standing up. "I need some air." Olivia's eyes narrowed for a fraction of a second, but she quickly masked it with a smile. "Of course. Don't be too long. It's late." "I won't," Caleb said. He didn't care if he was being rude. He needed to escape. He needed to clear his mind. The night air was cold against his skin as he stepped outside. The estate was vast, the garden stretching out before him in the moonlight. He walked aimlessly, his thoughts a jumbled mess. He felt like a criminal in his own life, like he was betraying everything he had once believed in. His father, who had worked so hard to provide for him, was oblivious to what was happening right under his nose. How had he let it come to this? How had he allowed Olivia to manipulate him, to make him feel things he knew were wrong? As he walked, his mind went back to that first night with Olivia. The way her fingers had brushed against his skin, the way she had whispered his name as if he was the only thing that mattered. It had felt good, and yet it had also felt like a curse. The sound of footsteps behind him made him freeze. He didn't have to turn around to know who it was. "Caleb," Olivia's voice called softly. "You're running away from me, aren't you?" Caleb swallowed hard. His heart was pounding in his chest as he slowly turned to face her. "You can't keep running," she said, taking a step toward him, her eyes gleaming in the darkness. "I'm not going to let you. You're mine now, Caleb. You always will be." Her words sent a shiver down his spine. He had to fight this. He had to stop it before it was too late. "Olivia, this needs to end," Caleb said, his voice shaking with fear and determination. "I can't keep living like this. I can't betray my father. But before he could finish, Olivia reached out and placed a hand on his chest, silencing him. "You don't understand, Caleb," she said softly. "You're already too far gone. There's no turning back now." The weight of her words sank deep into his bones. Caleb didn't know what to believe anymore. The guilt, the fear, the shame, they were too much to carry. And yet, in that moment, he understood that everything in his life had changed.